Hi everybody, this is Jitendranath from Xeno, and you're listening to Retail Reimagined, the podcast where we'll talk to CEOs, CMOs, CTOs from the retail industry and uncover the future of retail. So tune into the podcast and learn what's happening in the retail industry. Hi folks, this is Jiten once again, and welcome to Retail Reimagined. I do hope you're enjoying the podcast that we have brought on so far. Today's episode is one with a difference. In this episode of Retail Reimagined, I talk to Shivani Dutt, an accomplished fashion designer and merchandiser who's held various roles in both traditional and online retail. To name a few, Arvind Fashions, Amazon, Myntra, Levi's, and the list is endless. She was, till recently, the director of buying curation at Myntra, where she led a team of trend researchers that she says very specific Gen Z and curators focused on delivering a compelling customer experience and driving business growth. Recently recognized with the nationwide 50 Under 50 award by Mint for her contributions to fashion consulting industry, Shivani credits her success to a customer-centric approach and keen eye for culturally relevant trends. Please join me in welcoming Shivani Dutt to Retail Reimagined. Shivani, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to this episode of Retail Reimagined.
Thank you, Jiten. Great to be here. Thank you.
Shivani, I don't know where to start, right? But I think the best way to do it is just to kind of touch upon your complete, diverse, and extensive career that you have in the fashion industry, right? Just walk us through it and give us your experiences, give us your learnings from there.
Sure. So, I've spent about 20 years in design, buying, merchandising, and marketing roles. And through the process, I've helped lifestyle brands across the world, actually, delivering some unique products and distinctive experiences to their consumers. So in some sense, you could say I'm a hybrid merchant or a multi-hyphenate, multi-category designer. That's the way I would get myself. Or as an advertising CEO recently said, a super strong Swiss knife in the Indian retail kitchen where something is always cooking. Now, jokes aside, Jiten, compared to a lot of my tenured peers, I've had specialized short and intense runs, I would say, which is also why I've actually been able to sort of work with a lot of different brands, etc. And some of it was planned, some of it was serendipity, as you would say, but all of it in terms of experiences all the way, because it's just added how I bring what I bring, different advisory projects, etc. So the funny thing is, I did not grow up around fashion. I grew up in a small town where civil services, medicine, or engineering were the preferred, professions, right? And there was no organized retail per se. And fashion was something that if you traveled abroad, right, you would get exposure to it. So now the same city is a thriving metro, and it has produced some very strong retail leaders, designers, and organized retail has actually exploded there. It actually pulls in the highest rental in the market. So, and the funny thing is, when I actually told my parents that I'm going to do design at NIF, and I had cracked, I think, LSR and state steeples at that point in time, they were perplexed, but they said, okay, go ahead with it. And by the time I had graduated, it had actually become an entrance of choice. So that is I would say that is the way fashion has actually exploded in India, not just in terms of the skill set market or the education market, but also in terms of organized. So both in terms of what's driving it on the front and the people who are powering it in the back, on both sides, it's from there to now, it's great. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. You've kind of spent time both in India and the US. You've spent time in the Amazon of the world. You spent time possibly in one of India's oldest fashion brands, which is Arvind Fashion. Yeah, you spent time in Levi's, and of course, till recently with Myntra, right? What really, one, of course, is very diverse. I don't know if you're doing very similar roles, but if you obviously can walk us through that. And what were your learnings from here?
So you touched upon a very interesting part. Two things. One is where I wasn't with a particular firm for the longest time, but that's also a choice. And the diversity actually came in with the function changes as well. So I started off in design. I think my first stint and the four most memorable stints in my career that I would basically say was where it all started, was Alan Sonny Women's Wear. I had the opportunity to be part of the launch team in a design role. And that's where my eyes opened to sort of corporate design as a function within corporate retail. And from there, I would say the next big one was Levi's Bag. That's where I sort of got in without the marketing tips. Everybody else was either very pedigree from an IIM, and the learning curve was sharp. Then on to moving on to e-commerce, right? Which is, of course, in the US, whatever I saw with, let's say, name premium brands like Fossil, etc., which had stores, which had wholesale as well as .com. That's where my whole digital piece started. To now to Amazon and to Myntra, right? So moving from India to the States and working with different geographies, which is Europe as well as Southeast Asia and China, which was largely with at Amazon in India and then Myntra. The few learnings that I would basically say personally for me is that one has to have a very sharp understanding of the consumer to be able to traverse these different functions. That's a single threaded ask, I think I would say, for anybody in fashion retail, whichever the function. One would think that designers sort of define it beyond the trends or the macro trends that you see with consumers, but I don't think that's correct. Because design versus art, design is you're answering a problem statement for the consumer. Art is when it is something that's created from your ask, and it may find a market. It may find a product market. So the first part that I would say is sharp consumer understanding, absolutely critical. The second piece I would say is the ability to sort of leverage relationships. That's a superpower. I think that holds true in India as well as anywhere outside. And personally for me, because I was usually like the first Indian on the team, or trying to relate to a market that is so different from where I grew up or where I studied fashion. But to be able to do that, partly it was, of course, the skill, but also how you translate in terms of a relationship. The third piece that I would say is the power of edit. Curation is funny that it was one of my most recent tools, but largely we think design is additive, right? Or any experience is additive. But I had realized a lot of it is editing, which means what is it that's absolutely right for the consumer, for the product, and for the market. So that is another superpower that really helps, because across all of the names that you sort of made, all of them are very sharply curated, not just in terms of product selection, but also in terms of the way it is communicated. And the last piece is, I think we tend to get caught up in the nuts and bolts of what we're doing generally. Because, and that would be the case, right? When you're moving functions, when you're moving countries, etc. But the ability to sort of step back and take 30,000 feet view and also to stitch it together. So I often do this. I look back and I say, what is it that sort of worked across? That really helps identify Paretos. Let's say when you have a 5% fix, that can actually give you a 50% lift. And that is true in most of retail. And that brings me to the last point, which is technology. When technology comes in, it takes away the churn of you being involved in the nut and bolts. And to leverage technology is another superpower, because you're able to sort of do that. So that's kind of my 20-year view on having worked with a lot of these different brands. Yeah.
So how can you explain the merchandise-led revenue growth? That typically what happens is, at least from I've been in marketing, I've been in managing customer loyalty, CRM, and all that so forth. And we're so used to seeing everything on the front end, right? But what we call the front end, which is store level or the flow level, right? But for you all, to see it from the behind the scenes, what is it that goes into it, and what's the science or the whatever it is? Magic that you're.
The one piece is that it's funny that you say this, Jiten, because very recently I made a point. This is something that I was working with my team also at Myntra, is this whole idea about technology and artificial intelligence, right? Covering AI. Buying, merchandising, and design are probably the most human capital-centric roles that you have in retail, and they really are the engine in some ways that drive the entire product development and the selection piece. And there is quite a bit that actually sort of fits in this piece, and that actually has an impact, right? A lot of the firms that you spoke about, they have very set processes that have either been developed over time in the India perspective, or they can borrow from their global sort of counterparts so that they fit in some way, right? But the basics are very, very simple, right? If it's a brand or it's a plan, what is the product to market, right? What is it that you want to offer and to meet? So understanding the consumer and the market demand is very critical. And one may, like I said, designers and buyers don't think about it. You start with an Excel sheet, which is an OTD probably, and then you try and place it in terms of store. You take an offer what you're buying internationally, or you're producing and you're making a selection. But I think that is a limited. There's always a consumer understanding. Who is the consumer currently? Who is the consumer that you're going to acquire, right? And where is it that you really want to go, and does it actually make sense? Because these are decision points, the selection decision points that are made on a daily basis, I would say, right? So what is the consumer market fit? Supply at scale, right? Okay, the consumer wants it and they want it at a particular price, but are you able to supply it? Is it right? Does it make cost? Does it make sense from a cost perspective? Does it make sense from a margin perspective? Or is it right for the brand? That's another other platform, right? Is that where you sort of want to go? Then macro trends. That's something that I'm really glad to see this. 20 years now, there's a proper science, there's a proper understanding of forecasting and trend research as a separate function. But I'm talking about 20 years back. You would have specialists who would read the market trends, not just from a consumer macro perspective, but also from a fashion perspective. Because the distinctive part about fashion is, it is above all taste led also. There's a very strong taste parameter. So you can get the demographics and the psychographics or even the qualitative piece, but defining the taste is a different nuanced sort of play. And that's where I think to build anything new, reading the macro trends in terms of fashion is also very, very critical. And the last piece is, how does it all sort of fit in from an experience point of view? Because you could have bought the most well-balanced line. You could have designed it. You could have placed orders. But if the supply doesn't fit in, if it doesn't fit into the stores that you allocated it into, or into the experience, because there's a same experience that's going on, it will not sort of matter, right? So the experience needs to very, very aptly, almost like an impresario in the fashion space, it needs to orchestrate and bring it all together. So I think that's kind of how it would flow. And here is where I think technology has a strong role to play. So there isn't anything that comprehensively solves for this entire step or set of steps that are there. Yeah.
Got it. Right. So I'm going to ask you a question, maybe a quick question, because you spoke about customer focus or a customer-centric approach. You spoke about technology, I think, which is a big things today, right? And as you touched upon AI, of course, I'll come back to AI a little bit towards the end, a little later. But we always, again, I'm coming from possibly the marketing or the customer engagement perspective. As marketers or as retailers, we want to engage with our customers, right? We want to make it as relevant and as personalized as possible. And everything that we do, we generally tend to just possibly focus it on offers, or certain other attributes, right? I remember we used to also go and check with the merchandising teams and, hey, what are the new collection? Can we do something? But I don't see much of that really happening. Your thoughts on that?
That's a very good point that you sort of mentioned. And this is the plus side and the minus side of having technology, digital or e-commerce sort of come in. And I think it will settle. In my opinion, it will settle, because having had exposure to two of the largest and the best e-commerce organizations that exist, I can tell you that there is a lot of data, right? There is enough that comes in. But you're also right that the data defines a surface level of the strategy going forward or the pivots that happen. A lot of it still has to do with understanding the real consumer. And it could be a setup, it could be a cohort, right? It could be a cohort, it could be individual consumers. And that is where I think Omni has a very strong play. And Omni doesn't necessarily need, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily need to be that you must have stores. You could have pop-ups, you could have different ways of activation where you actually take that and you talk to the consumer. Because one thing that happens with e-commerce is you have a lot of data, but data is what you make of data. It's the insights that you pull out, and there are multiple ways of culling insights. But the truth of the matter is, you could be demographically very much a clone of the next person, right? We could have the same age markers, we could have the same lifestyle markers, etc. But the taste and the parameter or the perspective or your adoption, so that's on the back end. On the front end also, when you say sales, etc., sales is actually a mechanism, honestly, right? It's a mechanism to ensure that those customers that are actually looking at value being the largest trigger or discount being the largest trigger are able to buy. But it can be denoted in a lot of different ways. So the way I end up actually handling it, or the teams that I've actually worked with, we have always asked to have a larger and a more open connect with the consumer. So whether it's actual D2C, whether it is brands selling via distributors to consumers, many ways of having that this. So in my experience in the offline space, we were actually required in most of the places that I worked to work the flow, because when you work the flow, you're able to sort of meet the consumer where they're at, right? So that's for your offline retail. So, and of course, in buying and merchandising, you actually do up the store. So you take the opportunity to also observe the consumer, to understand what they're picking up. And this is beyond data. This is beyond what we do on a fortnightly basis. If we're looking at performance data, what started work, what cuts work, it's the real consumer that you put a face to. And this would definitely be a part of that. On the e-commerce side, where it may seem that a lot of things get very hazy and very lost in the sea of data, I can tell you that the insights team or the market research team is very years part of most e-commerce. Amazon, because I was part of the larger cross-category marketing team, everything started with insights. And that meant traditional focus groups as well as digital focus groups. And even at Myntra, where you have something called a KYC, Know Your Consumer. So there are multiple programs that a lot of large-scale e-commerce firms are also using to stay connected to the real consumer. Whether it means get a pool of Gen Zs who are your go-to folks to ask if a particular product or a particular look of a store or a particular construct will actually sort of work, or what they're looking for. So there are mechanisms that even in the age of digital and e-commerce that are driving the direct access to consumer. And of course, design and buying merchandising, we ask for, and we're definitely there. Because without understanding consumer, you cannot drive design or selection.
Absolutely. I think well articulated the point, right? I think when one looks at even customer engagement in whatever means, I think it shouldn't be an effort driven in silos, right? I think it's kind of driven holistically across the entire retail ecosystem. Yeah. One question that's intrigued me, and I want to ask you this. I know you spent time in India, you spent time in the US and now in India. The retail trends that you see, how does it differ? What are the learnings that you brought from here, and where is India really going in terms of its retail?
That's a great question. And if you had asked me this 5 years back, I would have probably had a different answer. But in general, I would say there are different life stages, Jiten, of retail development, whether it is consumer co-ops or trends, or how online and offline is actually budging in a different manner. Let's say in the US, the whole concept of outlets is a very structured concept, which means that, again, it's been there since the days of Macy's. So mid-priced retail segments that were there to premium priced. So all of them have evolved their own sort of outlet format, and it's a structured base that flows, which is outside the city. You actually go to a outlet mall and to sort of shop. And that's one thing that I actually haven't sort of seen in India yet, especially in the luxury, like the rich to luxury segment. That's something that US has a heads up on. Some department stores, well-known department stores, they may survive the consumption slowdown. They may decide to become more e-commerce driven, or actually go to basic value plus design mode, which is always sort of going to be there. in the US, where design play, network, category expansion, channel diversification, that will all sort of see. India, in that sense, is a fragmented market. And I would say it's a polarized market where you've got these two sets happening. And you've probably heard this from a lot of other people. You've got the luxury premium segment and you've got a value segment that's very strong, both driven by two separate Indias. One is India, the other is Bharat, right? And that is where value translates very, very differently. Sales is relevant for both. Timing and the messaging is what makes it relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where my end is in terms of differences.
Time messaging is what you said, right?
Yes. In terms of how do you take the learnings from the US and actually try and sort of translate it. Yeah.
But given the fact that you're operating within the Indian environment, is there a differentiation would you deploy for both India and Bharat?
Yes, absolutely. I would definitely say so. So there are unifying principles that should work, but that's more about how we operate, right? That's my strong point of view on the role of design, or the role of curated selection on both sides. And of course, so India, where it's a market that's actually expanding very, very sharply. In fact, I was sort of reading somewhere that you have the largest base of high net worth income households that are sort of growing here. Then on the other side, we've got Gen Zs, which are very, very prominent. And this would hold true for both India as well as Bharat, right? Because I think I read somewhere that it's going to be 500 million Gen Z consumers in the next 4 to 5 sort of years that you see. And they will be split, I don't know, evenly or unevenly, but prominently between India and sort of Bharat, right? On how it's from. Now, when you ask me about the difference on both, it's where they are in their fashion adoption cycle. That's one thing. And that bridge is always going to be slightly different, but it's also becoming narrower. So value is very important, but like a lot of retailers and e-commerce folks. And this is where data, if you don't deep dive into it, you will make mistake. They would say that Bharat is a very sales-driven market. I would beg to differ that value translates differently. Some of the monikers that we see in terms of design, color, brand logos, certain cuts, what is sort of permissible, but with a little bit of edit and change. It's how you translate it, right? Versus in terms of actual design. Also in terms of how you message. It's more vernacular. It goes more English or English style or English and whatever the pieces are. So I would not want to just say that it's a laggard market purely because of affordability. It is because of differences in where they are in their adoption cycle,
Right.
difference in taste.
Got it. And
On a different piece that I remember at a CK, one of the highest grossing stores of CK, at least when I was there, was actually in a tier 2 city. And you wouldn't expect, and in a lot of the cities, the consumer ask is what drove stores actually being launched there. So you would think that the disposable income is less, or they would be a laggard a value market where you would put a season -2. But a lot of brands will actually tell you this, that's actually what's driving on one end on the spectrum, higher buying purchase.
yeah. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, no wonder. I think a lot of brands, looking at the cost of retail floor space in the cities is now are moving to quite quickly into the tier 2 and tier 3 markets, right? So extension of that question, omnichannel.
Yes.
Mentioned it sometime prior during our conversation. The importance of omnichannel in all of this.
Right.
In reality, do you see brands really taking it up very seriously? And do they have to?
Very good question, Jiten. Again, if you had asked me 2 years or 3 years ago, I would have had a different play. So you answered it very well yourself by the fact that there are a lot of tier 2, tier 3 cities that are actually going to see an explosion of offline retail. And what brands are actually doing is, with having a store or a set of stores there, they're giving their whole brand an identity. It's a real space that you stay connected to. The way e-commerce came in India, it wasn't driven from an experience mode point of view. And largely by the way merchandise moved, right? Discounting and sales became the larger play. It's also how they are scaled. It's where you have to show the performance results. That's how sales and sales messaging actually drove a certain perception of the e-commerce stores. But I think as we mature, even on the e-commerce side, branding and experience will become important. And hence, wherever you have a network of good stores, you would have to have a link in some ways of figuring out how the consumer stays connected. So it's an experiential connect that only can actually provide. And I think that will be seen as the market sort of mature. Some are already doing it, some will actually take to it. Right. You may see a lot more of it in the luxury or the premium bridge to luxury brand space. And maybe there's an opportunity for the erstwhile department stores to actually look at that and bring that forward, because you lock in the consumer across their consumer journey in that manner. That's way more important versus allowing them to shop a sale here and shop a sale there instead. So in short, you will see that sort of emerging.
Yeah, yeah. And the interesting point you raised on the fact that everything driven by sales and it became, but I think it was not only e-commerce brand or P2C brands. I think traditional retail also kind of fell victim to it.
Yeah.
Because I hope that changes. And like you said, the maturity comes in. Yeah. Again, you spoke about AI and technology, right? What is it that retailers need to do to adopt to this? Are they doing enough in this space?
It's up for debate. This is a very hot topic right now, and not just in the retail space not just fashion retail, it's across the board. Like I stated earlier, and having been on the back end of the work, design, merchandising, buying, they're very human-centered functions. In India specifically, it's a large chain of human functions that actually drive it. And why India? Actually, same is true for US, etc. You've got career merchants, etc. But there are tasks that can be automated. That is where AI can sort of support it. There isn't a single short product that actually, even as of today, that actually takes care of the entire design, buying, merchandising, sourcing sort of function. When I was starting out, product line management systems were being designed and a lot of people were testing it, etc. But we still work a lot with Excels and Google Sheet forms and typically drawn tech packs. So that's one space that the faster we adopt to it, the faster we will be able to sort of respond. Because from a macro perspective, there is a lot of consolidation that's happening. So an auto simplification of the market. So you've got consolidation of fashion conglomerates. As you can see, yes, you've got D2C brands that are mushrooming, but then get absorbed. D2C is the channel of choice. So, and what D2C, a lot of people say or don't notice, is that you've got a segment, a much sharper cohort of consumers that you're actually going for. And a lot of them are either single product or single product line operates. And that's where the response time that they're also looking at has to be fast. So the entire cycle, buying, merchandising, and retailing has to become that fast. The only way that can happen is not by adding more humans to it. It is by making some of that process automated. Even the idea of the house of brands coming, you're creating more and more brands. So there's a lot of consolidation that's happening. In terms of merchandising, we'll experience shorter fashion calendars, right? You'll have limited long tail drops. This whole idea of I'm buying 9 months in advance or 12 months in advance, which is traditional retail, that is going to go away. So that's really going to spin everything on its head. And the faster brands and platforms sort of adopt to it, the better it will be. There'll be real-time assortments for international brands. Earlier, we used to say, okay, you can bring in something in India 8 months later, and it will still be fashionably relevant. No. If I have a Louis Vuitton launch or a LVMH launch, why Louis Vuitton? You take a Supreme or any of the other brands also. It's all Crocs. It's real time. Whatever is released internationally is available. That's thanks to digital. So assortment will have to become really real time. social listening, all of that. So there's a lot that is pushing the back end of the market to really grow up and adopt AI, not from a place of fear, but from a place of wisdom. We're actually taking it and making it work for you versus you working.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of connectivity because, again, connecting back to the point saying, okay, how does it, if the change is happening there, how does it translate into actually making things even better for the customer, right? Be it at the store, be it on the experience of the website, and getting far more personalized in actually offering the customer something that he or she wants.
So, Jitan, what you said, I'll also add for a more recent, very absolutely recent experience, and I'm not going to name completely, but the fact that personalization is the other hot topic right now, that a lot of e-commerce firms are going in for personalization. But how do you get there? One is, of course, you understand that you don't have one customer or two customers. You could have experience that could be differentiated through a cohort of 12 or 20 different customers. And unless you understand that whole piece, and I did this in my last stint, it was the last piece of that will play out, is you're going to merchandise for that many different experiences.
Oh.
So bit of the work that is sort of exploding that is going to fall on the back end, where technology is the only answer.
Yeah. I think, again, it boils down to how sharply focused you're on the customer, and then how do you use technology to leverage and bring the data to your advantage, right? One last question, Shivani, and you've had a lot of experience. You've gained a lot of experience. You've played a lot of roles. Retail has changed. Of course, pandemic also played its part. The last 5-7 years, retail has changed and it's transforming, right? So what should brand leaders look for in the next few years? What can they look for? It need not be fashion trend, but generally, what should they keep in mind and look out for?
So some of it actually, I think I did sort of mention in my last conversation. I just answered in the previous piece. It's an interesting time to be in fashion. A lot of people are basically like, how is it going to play out? How is it going to go anywhere? But like I mentioned, there's a lot that's happening. You've got a consolidation of large fashion houses. And I'm specifically answering about India, right? There isn't an India fashion house that has completely or solidly made its mark, but it will. Now, you may have one, two, you may have three. That's one thing. So there's consolidation there. D2C cannot be a small play. It is a mainstay. So you have offline, you have online, but even in online, you've got marketplaces, you've got your own .com, which becomes really, very critical because having your handle on your own customer is absolutely key. So it's 100% responsibility of that, as well as then you get the data and feed you what you need to know, not just for design and selection, but even for marketing and promotion all together. Because we are expanding digitally, there is a scope for as many different brands or clusters of brands. We've started thinking in terms of apps, in terms of experiences, but have we actually thought of what's going to feed those apps? So each app or each set of apps has its own cluster of brands that would actually fit it. But we haven't thought of house of brands from that sort of angle and perspective. Fashion retailers will have to flip their understanding and see that if it's getting so nuanced in terms of experiences, then you can really get nuanced in terms of the brands. And that's also probably what's driving private label explosion. And international brands, they're coming to India, not just as a, by the way, I'm extending my range here. International brands will make and curate for India specifically. Your case in point. So it may start in luxury, but it will go on run. So I think they need to basically get ready for, like I said, shorter fashion calendars, real-time assortment, the idea on guest influencers and guest curators. So you will also see a lot of skills that will sort of be imported. People who will bring a different flavor, or brands that will not have their set design or mind merchandising team. It could be a rotation. That's the way I actually see it. Because you bring in the flavor of what is being selected for that piece. For social listening, trend spotting, there's a lot that's going on in terms of chatter that I don't think we are actually listening to much better. Like planning and buying scenarios, there's so much that's on play that you can design your own experiences, etc. But the back end takes a lot of scenario planning when you're opening any new store, either real store or a shop and shop online, right? There's scenario planning that is a lot of work that goes in, or planogramming, etc. All of that can be AI made. It can figure out the right set of prompts to work with. Digital showrooming and something. CK has done it, TH does it. Other Indian retailers need, not just from a cost perspective, but from an effort perspective. That is where the maximum sort of effort and time actually goes in. That's where you need a 9-month calendar. And that's not to be cut in the long run.
That I'd go other track, right? That you mentioned digital storefronts, right? Do you see Metaverse becoming a big thing in retail?
So, I think not Metaverse in its form today. I definitely feel that there'll be a hybrid form. Let me explain that to you. Because I'm a mother to a 7-year-old and I see a lot of other kids, 7, 10, 11, 12, all in the society. All of them are they're really glued to the screen. And if you look at the content that they watch or they engage in, it is absolutely virtual. If you even sit them down and talk to them, they think in those avatar terms, etc. So it's definitely there. The way Metaverse today is, other than the experience, to even get to that space for a regular ASPA, or I would say generally, it takes time. So the easier that they make it for them to integrate in the space that they're already there, that is something that will actually play out. But the point is that does it apply to everyone? I don't think so. There is an age cut. There's a sharp age cut that I see, which is when this audience that I spoke about, this alpha, when it becomes mature and they have the discretionary spend power and the ability to jump in and out of experiences seamlessly, they will sort of take. That's when your city metaverse actually takes. That's my sense.
Absolutely.
Podcaster talking.
No, perfect. So I think what it does is, and listening to your conversation, I think what I've realized is I think there's a tremendous opportunity for marketers. I won't call it challenge. I won't call it whatever, but I'll call it an opportunity, because how do marketers use all of this information to drive better engagement with their customers and drive a higher retention? Because I think that's what's key, given the plethora of choice that a customer would have, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thanks, Shivani. Thanks so much for spending this time. I think it was amazing. I did pick up and learned a lot from this conversation. Good to actually catch up and understand retail from a complete perspective, not just a very siloed one.
Yeah. It's a very divergent perspective, but that's what reading the leaves beyond where you are currently does to you from a trend supporting point.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Great conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.